So this is my audience. Poetry is a universal power. As long as you know how to speak, you can make a poem. Humans interpret the world via language, and all groups of humans have been using poetry to express themselves for thousands of years. In order to make good poetry, one must utilize the creative process by analyzing poems and song lyrics, brainstorming, and making sure to keep an open mind. So let's begin with the analysis process. Why analyze poems and song lyrics? Song lyrics are the most common form of poetry in the modern world. According to the book Mastery by Robert Greene, whenever you observe something for a long period of time or you learn something new, the front of your brain swells up with new connections. Eventually, these connections move to your long term memory, and the front of your brain returns back to its normal size. When your brain has new connections, that you start to notice new patterns automatically. While everybody has creativity and intuition, if you don't have the proper knowledge and experience, you remain on the level of a child. So first, it's important to start out simple by simply looking at the words that rhyme. Eventually, you'll notice things such as rhyme schemes or the fact that the amount of syllables that each sentence has follows a pattern. Or you may notice that when a poem uses the same rhyme an even amount of times, it sounds natural, but when the poem uses a rhyme an odd amount of times, it doesn't sound natural unless the rhythm of the sentence calls for it. So let's continue with the brainstorming process. Brainstorming is important because it helps to activate intuition and creates inspiration. According to a Google talk done by the author Robert Greene, that the brain connects convoluted chains of information automatically. According to the writer's book of wisdom, one shouldn't wait till they're inspired to start writing. The act of writing in and of itself will create inspiration. Therefore, it's important to jot down words that merely sound similar or are merely related. One can also write down sentences, even if they're incomplete, it doesn't matter because you can always fix what you have written later. So, let's continue with the process of staying open minded. If you hyper-focus on rhyming, you won't make good poetry. However, if you focus on things like themes, the things such as rhyming will come naturally. If you are afraid to explore the contents of your own mind, your mind will become unoriginal. According to the Google talk by Robert Greene, that the more you increase your knowledge, the more closed off and defensive you become, and eventually you become a prisoner of your own knowledge. So he recommends several methods to stay open minded. The first is to cultivate negative capability. Negative capability is the ability to see evidence which is contradictory or ambiguous without needing to immediately explain it away or becoming frightened. It's the ability to deal with uncertainty. And several ways to deal with negative capability involve observing information without needing to explain it, uh, embracing chaos instead of seeing chaos and uncertainty as frightening, to see it as stimulating and exciting, and to study things which are opposite from you. For example, if there is an opposite style of poetry, to study it and be able to incorporate its methods into your own work. Another method to stay open minded is to think like an outsider. A good example of this, in regards to poetry, would be rap music. A lot of people wouldn't expect that poetry would be popular in impoverished African American neighborhoods, but poetry has been being enjoyed by people of all backgrounds and classes for thousands of years. And when you are struggling against the system that You can actually make more interesting rhymes because you are required to be more individualistic. And if you own a nightclub, you can rip popular tracks and make loops and beats without having to worry about being sued for copyright. So as long as you have a guy writing rhymes and a guy making a beat, and as long as those rhymes flow over the beat, you can make a rap song. So another method is to use something known as active imagination. The difference between regular imagination and active imagination is that regular imagination is more free and open ended and less limited. It's similar to the brainstorming process. Whereas active imagination requires modifying something which is concrete and real. For example, once your poem has more of a structure or a theme, to modify the sentences you're writing by crossing out sentences, rewriting sentences, changing the ends, changing the orders of the sentences. And the good thing about active and regular imagination is that it's not a linear process. It can be done in a loop. So once you employ active imagination, you can also go back to brainstorming to help modify what you've written. Another example of using active imagination is to submit your work to feedback, so that way that you can change what you've written. And the last method for keeping an open mind is to subvert your ways of thinking. For example, instead of focusing on the goals or the end results of a project, to focus on the creative process itself. When you focus on the details of something, you will notice things you hadn't before. Or instead of interpreting life via patterns and things that match those patterns, that it can be helpful to focus on the things that supposedly contradict your preconceived patterns, and the things that appear to be contradictions may be something that your culture simply cannot face yet. So, in conclusion, in order to make good poetry, one must utilize the basic steps of the creative process. In order to do this, one must analyze song lyrics and poetry, brainstorm, and work to keep an open mind. And the reason why poetry is so important is because life is given its purpose by the various shades of beauty that can be found in every aspect of existence.